She thought she could just waltz into my garage, dump her car like it belonged there, and leave without a care in the world. What she didn't know was that her entitlement was about to cost her big time. I watched every move, every smug smirk, every careless assumption, and I knew exactly how I was going to handle it. You won't believe what happened next. Before we dive into this unbelievable HOA drama, make sure to hit that subscribe button and turn on notifications so you never miss these insane real-life stories. Trust me, you'll want to stay tuned for every shocking detail. It all started on a quiet Saturday morning in my suburban neighborhood, a place where order and rules were supposed to govern our lives. My garage had always been my sanctuary, the one place I could keep my cars, tools, and personal items safe from the chaos of the outside world. That morning, as I pulled into my driveway, I noticed a car I didn't recognize parked right in front of my garage. At first, I thought maybe it was a delivery or a neighbor dropping something off, but the moment I saw Karen step out, everything clicked. Karen, the ultimate HOA nightmare. She was the type of person who lived for rules when they suited her and bent them whenever it didn't. Her reputation for entitlement was well known, and now she was bringing it directly into my property. As I approached, her smug grin told me she thought this was harmless, that her privileged HOA status gave her the right to park wherever she pleased. I stared at her car, realizing it wasn't just parked, it was blocking my entire garage, making it impossible for me to access anything inside. Inside me, a mixture of frustration, disbelief, and an oddly satisfying plotting energy began to brew. I could feel the gears turning, thinking of ways to give her a taste of the audacity she displayed every day in the neighborhood. This wasn't just about a car. It was about respect, boundaries, and the fine art of turning the tables. I left the driveway for a moment to gather information, snapping pictures and documenting everything, knowing that in this HOA-obsessed community, evidence was power. What Karen didn't know was that I had connections with local scrapyards and tow services, a little network that thrived on situations like these. It was a Saturday, and most people were enjoying coffee or walks. She was busy making an enemy without realizing it. Over the next few hours, I observed her carefully. She wasn't moving her car, she wasn't planning to leave, and she was clearly expecting me to either ignore it or accommodate her whims. My patience, however, had a limit. I started contacting the scrapyard, giving them all the details of a friendly, responsible disposal of an abandoned vehicle. By the afternoon, everything was in place, and I watched with satisfaction as the tow truck arrived, lifting her car and taking it away in front of her very eyes. Karen's face was priceless, a mixture of horror and rage, her entitlement evaporating like mist in the sunlight. This was only the beginning, the first lesson in my HOA revenge saga. As the tow truck drove away, I knew the neighborhood would buzz with rumors, debates, and speculation. Karen's bold move had backfired spectacularly, and the consequences would ripple far beyond just her missing car. The stage was set for what was going to become a legendary tale of entitlement, frustration, and sweet, sweet justice, a story that would be whispered in HOA meetings for months to come. The next morning, the neighborhood was alive with gossip. People peeked through blinds, whispered over fences, and speculated about the sudden disappearance of Karen's car. I walked through the streets casually, pretending ignorance while secretly savoring every knowing glance and whispered comment. This was more than just a prank. It was a statement. It wasn't about hatred, it was about respect, boundaries, and reclaiming control in a world where entitlement often went unchecked. I noticed Karen pacing in her yard, phone in hand, likely calling every tow service, scrapyard, and HOA official in a desperate attempt to reverse what had happened. Her expression was the perfect mix of disbelief and fury, the kind you only see when someone realizes they've seriously miscalculated. As days went on, her frustration only grew. Notices were posted, complaints were filed, but all were futile. She had left her car where it didn't belong, and I had the receipts, the photographs, and the tow confirmations to back every action I had taken. I even started documenting the entire ordeal, taking photos of the car being hauled off, noting timestamps, and tracking every phone call. This wasn't just about revenge. It was about creating a record, a narrative that would be undeniable. Neighborhood forums lit up, debates ensued, and suddenly, Karen wasn't the figure of authority or entitlement she thought she was. She became the cautionary tale, the example of what happens when personal boundaries are ignored. I watched all of this unfold with a sense of satisfaction I hadn't expected. It wasn't just about her car. It was about reclaiming agency, asserting one's rights and showing that the community's unspoken rules applied to everyone, regardless of their social standing or reputation. The momentum continued to build, and I realized this was going to be bigger than I initially imagined. People were talking, sharing stories, and drawing parallels to their own experiences with entitlement. The HOA gossip mill had found a new gem, and I was at the center of it, not as a provocateur, but as a storyteller, chronicling the unexpected consequences of ignoring basic respect. I also began receiving subtle messages from neighbors, a mix of encouragement and warnings, all acknowledging the line Karen had crossed. This was validation of the impact of my actions. The weeks that followed cemented the lesson further. Karen attempted to replace her vehicle, but every attempt seemed to be shadowed by the memory of what had happened. Neighbors subtly reminded her of the incident, and I made sure to remain calm, collected, and almost indifferent. An unspoken reinforcement that boundaries once crossed come with repercussions. By the end of this chapter of events, it was clear that Karen's sense of entitlement had crumbled under the weight of consequences, and I had emerged not just victorious but strategically unscathed, a master of quiet, effective retaliation. The stage was set for the next chapter in this ongoing neighborhood drama, a saga that was only beginning to reveal its full scope. Months passed, but the echoes of that Saturday morning lingered. Karen, humiliated and frustrated, had become a shadow in the community, carefully avoiding confrontation and public scrutiny. Meanwhile, I found myself reflecting on the broader impact of what had occurred. This wasn't just a personal victory. It had turned into a story about accountability, respect, and the delicate balance of community living. I continued to observe Karen from a distance, noting how her behavior subtly shifted. No longer was she the bold, untouchable figure who dictated her will through entitlement. There were moments when she hesitated, reconsidered actions, and even sought approval before making decisions. It was a transformation that was almost imperceptible, but significant enough to notice. In the meantime, I leveraged the situation to strengthen relationships with other neighbors. People began sharing their own frustrations, their own stories of entitlement and overreach. I listened, validated, and occasionally offered insights, subtly weaving my own narrative into the communal fabric. My reputation grew as someone who could navigate HOA conflicts with strategy and finesse, turning potential chaos into a learning experience for everyone involved. Beyond social dynamics, there were small victories in personal logistics. With Karen's car gone, my garage regained its intended function. Tools, vehicles, and personal items were no longer obstructed, and I could move freely without fear of someone disregarding boundaries. Each small act of order reinforced the larger narrative of respect and personal agency. But not all was peaceful. Karen attempted subtle retaliation, reaching out to HOA boards, filing complaints, and even trying to sway neighbors to her side. I anticipated these moves, documenting each interaction and maintaining a level of calm and professionalism that made her efforts futile. Her frustration became almost performative, a spectacle that reinforced the consequences of entitlement rather than diminished them. Community perception shifted in my favor. Casual conversations in yards, forums, and meetings began referencing the event not as a personal feud, but as an illustration of accountability. Karen's misstep became a cautionary tale, a story parents shared with children, a topic that seasoned neighbors discussed with a mix of amusement and approval. This chapter concluded with a sense of equilibrium restored. Karen had learned, the neighborhood had a story to talk about, and I had emerged not just victorious but respected, demonstrating that measured, strategic responses could reshape dynamics in a way that brute confrontation never could. The story was far from over, however, and the next chapter promised even more dramatic revelations, deeper lessons, and a final conclusion that no one in the neighborhood would forget. Eventually, Karen attempted to regain her standing in the community, attending HOA meetings with a newfound caution, her demeanor more restrained, her assertiveness subdued. The contrast between her previous boldness and current hesitance was striking. I observed silently, analyzing patterns, anticipating reactions, and maintaining my position as someone who had weathered the storm with dignity and strategy. Her efforts to recover influence were met with subtle resistance. Neighbors who had once avoided confrontation now shared anecdotes of her entitlement, creating a quiet but pervasive social barrier. Even casual conversations carried undertones of the legendary garage incident, serving as a reminder that actions have consequences. As the months went on, the community's perception of Karen shifted permanently. She was no longer the dominant figure she once was. Her authority had eroded, replaced by caution, embarrassment, and a lingering sense of accountability. My own interactions became more strategic, balancing visibility with discretion, ensuring that my reputation remained untarnished while reinforcing the narrative of responsible ownership and personal boundaries. I also began mentoring newer neighbors, sharing insights about community engagement, boundary setting, and conflict resolution. The garage incident became a case study, a practical example of how to assert rights without escalating conflict unnecessarily. Karen, meanwhile, struggled with subtle forms of social exclusion. Invitations were limited, casual conversations were monitored, and her previous influence within the HOA board was diminished. Attempts to regain control were met with polite resistance, a testament to the long-lasting impact of a single, well-executed response to entitlement. By the end of this chapter, a clear pattern had emerged. Accountability, strategy, and discretion were far more effective than confrontation, and the community had internalized this lesson. Karen's initial act of audacity had spiraled into a full-blown narrative of consequence, demonstrating the delicate balance between privilege and responsibility. The story was approaching its climax, with the final resolution promising to cement these lessons in the collective memory of the neighborhood, leaving an indelible mark on the dynamics of entitlement, respect, and personal agency. In the final phase of this saga, the neighborhood had transformed. Karen's car was gone, her authority diminished, and the HOA community had embraced a culture of accountability. The story of the garage incident had evolved into a legend, referenced in conversations, newsletters, and even during casual social interactions. I continued to navigate these dynamics with awareness and strategic foresight. The climax wasn't just about Karen. It was about the long-term implications of entitlement and the power of measured response. Residents who had previously tolerated minor infractions now felt empowered to assert their rights, knowing that the community collectively valued respect and personal boundaries. Karen's attempts to reclaim status became increasingly futile. Every move she made was met with either polite but firm resistance or subtle social cues that reminded her of the consequences of her actions. Even small gestures like attempting to park in front of others' homes or overriding neighborhood rules were met with immediate corrective feedback. The neighborhood had internalized the lesson: entitlement had limits and accountability was unavoidable. Reflecting on the entire experience, I recognized that the incident had broader implications beyond personal victory. It had created a template for conflict resolution, a story that highlighted the importance of documentation, strategic planning, and the power of a calm, measured response. Karen's misstep had inadvertently catalyzed a cultural shift within the community, reinforcing respect, order, and the importance of personal boundaries. By the end of this narrative, the neighborhood had achieved a balance. Karen had retreated into caution. The HOA functioned with a renewed sense of fairness, and I had established a reputation not as a provocateur, but as a strategic, responsible member of the community. The saga concluded with a sense of closure, the lessons clear and the impact enduring. Karen's entitlement had met its match, and the neighborhood emerged stronger, wiser, and more cohesive, a testament to the power of thoughtful action and the inevitability of consequences. If you enjoyed this unbelievable HOA story, make sure to smash that like button, hit subscribe, and turn on the notification bell so you don't miss any of these jaw-dropping real-life tales. Share your thoughts in the comments. What would you have done if someone parked in your garage without permission? Stay tuned, because the next story might hit even closer to home.